Do you guys hear that? That is the sound of springtime. I saw somewhere once, my goal for the year is to be half the gardener I aspired to be in the depths of winter, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I think there's something about spring that gives us this new sense of hope. It's like our slate has been wiped completely clean, and it doesn't matter what happened last year. Whatever happened last year stays in last year. Can we all agree on that? I think last year's gardening season was hard for us because for the first time ever, I put an extensive amount of research into the garden over the winter. I carefully selected all of our varieties. I started everything on schedule. I planned out the whole garden. We had a new watering system. We were gonna have our best garden ever. And we just had a couple bumps along the way. And then to top it all off, we had a record-breaking early frost at the end of September. So by the time things were really getting going, a hard frost wiped everything out and we were done. To all the peppers that never peppered. To all the melons that never meloned. Here's to all of our green tomatoes in the garage that I fear will never ripen. So all that said, last year's behind us, and once again, it's time to get ready for the garden this year. So today I want to share with you guys where things are at right now, kind of what I've been working on, and finally what our big plans are for the year. Our plans to make this year our best year yet. If you remember last year in spring before planting, we thought ahead and we built up what was our compost pile. We had a neighbor generous enough to give us hay and manure, so we got 2 yards of each. We made a really huge pile. We turned it a couple of times. Lo and behold, it's all broken down and we had a huge heaping pile of beautiful compost. I moved a large portion of that compost into our garden to top off all of our raised beds. Because these beds are so deep, we filled the bottom half of the beds with tree bark. So every year, our beds compress a little bit, and what starts off with a full bed of soil, by the next year it's down quite a bit. So I added a lot of compost to all of these beds. I then went ahead and got our watering system kind of laid out again. We didn't disconnect it, we're not going to do any major changes to it this year, but I wanted to make sure it was ready to go so that when we're ready to plant, we don't have to worry about that. All we have to worry about is getting our transplants in the ground. I made sure to do any cleanup that was lingering from the end of the season, so I made sure to get all of our tomato cages in one spot. And these are green onions that I started from seed last year. I planned on doing a bunch of them so that we could harvest, a full set and we had more, but then I realized you can cut them and they grow again. So I realized these volunteer to come back season after season, so that's really awesome. And guess what? We've already been including these in our omelets and in our dinners. We also have these guys in our little sunflower bed, and this is their 3rd year coming back, so I hope these have a strong year as well. Our chives, this comes back every year. This is its 3rd year, looking beautiful. This is our mint pot. I started all this from seed, and it didn't really get going until the end of the year, so we actually only had one harvest from it, and I turned it into mint extract, which I'm really excited to share an update with you guys on. But I'm happy because it's not even summer yet, and we already have a decent amount of mint. And then what I did last fall was I planted a bunch of garlic for the first time. I can't tell you why, but garlic supposedly does the best when you plant the bulbs in fall, let them overwinter, and then you harvest them in late spring, early summer, maybe mid-June around these parts. I'm not gonna lie, I'm one of those people that loves the pre-crushed garlic in a jar from the grocery store because ain't nobody got time to crush garlic and peel it and do all that. But I'm hoping that this garlic changes my mind. And last but not least, we started a bunch of strawberries in these pots and those 2 pots last year from seed, and at the end of the season we got 1 strawberry and we shared it. But this year I can tell you we're gonna get some strawberries. Look at all that beautiful growth. There's even little buds in here if you look. Moving on to what I already planted this year. So last year this entire bed was a cut and come again lettuce bed, and that worked extremely well. The idea is that you don't harvest the entire head of lettuce, but again you cut it at the base and it just grows back. It's awesome. We've already planted multiple rows of lettuce, but the only thing that's come up so far is the arugula. And we're hoping in another few weeks we can start making salads out of this. Bugaboo, do you like arugula? It's a little spicy, huh? Yep. In this bed, I already planted multiple rows of carrots. I definitely pushed the limits with when I put those in the ground, so I had a fairly poor germination rate. But you can see, those are carrots. I also put some beets in here, waiting for those to come up. And in the back row, on these two beds, I planted a bunch of sugar snap peas. I'll share more on those and what I'm thinking in a little bit. We had them last year, but our watering system had problems, so they weren't getting watered, and they died really early. Like, we only got one sugar snap pea off of them. I have radishes in this bed, and then over here I got a little carried away, and I decided to plant a bunch of dill. And last but not least, last fall, Jesse and Anna worked very hard to chip up a bunch of waste we had on the property. So we have this whole mountain of wood chips that we could put in there. We'll probably use some of it for mulch in the beds once we plant, because pulling it back to plant is pretty annoying if you ask me, especially if you direct sow and you're trying to have a good germination rate. But we do plan on putting a bunch down in the walking path, and that's gonna make that garden area just a much nicer place to be. All right, let's move on to the really exciting stuff. What are we gonna plant? How is this year gonna be better than last year? Last year, I got really crazy with our garden planning, and in Adobe Illustrator, I mocked up our garden, true to dimension. I figured out the plant spacing, and I made our ultimate garden plan. I did a whole video on that if you haven't seen it. So here's what last year's garden looked like. Our goal for the garden was to really focus on things we actually eat. And not only that, but we really wanted to think about food preservation. So potatoes and onions, for example, are cheap to buy, but we thought we do eat those, so let's challenge ourselves to grow them. The potatoes took up quite a bit of space. They did do really well. We had a great harvest, but we blew through them by the end of the year, so we didn't grow nearly enough. So that tells me to truly grow our potato needs for the year, we'd have to dedicate a lot more garden space to them. Not only that, but if we could grow them for the entire year, we don't really have a way to store them yet in a way that they will last. A root cellar is in the plans, it's just not gonna happen right now. And we have thought about dehydrating or canning them, but we also discovered that we have the ability to barter for some of these root vegetables, and I think in the end it kind of makes sense to do that and not necessarily worry about growing them ourselves, because we'd rather focus on things that maybe we're not able to barter for, or it doesn't really make sense, like tomatoes and peppers, and those are certainly things that are more expensive in the store, or there just isn't a store equivalent. So in addition to that, we also focused on succession planting, which means instead of planting all of your vegetables at once, like all these beets, and they all are ready to harvest at once, you plant maybe one row at a time and you space them out every 2 to 3 weeks, something like that. And that didn't really go according to plan. And I think, to be honest, that's because our water system wasn't really working. Our hoses clogged really quickly and we didn't catch it. And then I just think that we didn't have maybe enough hoses, or our seeds were spaced too far apart from the hoses. So I think what happened is that they didn't end up germinating. So our first row did well, the second row did less good, and then that's it. So I feel like we had a lot of wasted bed space due to trying our hand at succession planting. Down here we have our cucumbers. We only got one cucumber. Our torpedo melons ended up dying. Again, I think that has to do with our water system early on not working. So that's last year's garden plan. Here's this year's garden plan. It looks oddly similar. I think because I feel we didn't really get a chance to see how our garden plan last year worked for a number of different reasons. I kind of felt like I want a do-over, okay? Not only that, but we worked hard to get this watering system up, and I don't really want to change it. So for example, on the left and right sides, we have just like a soaker hose. It's a hose with perforations every so often. But then for our peppers and our tomatoes, we are spot watering. So we have little like nozzle things where each plant goes, so it doesn't make sense to plant a row of lettuce there without changing the hoses out, and I just don't want to do that. It can be ideal to rotate your crops every year, so don't plant tomatoes where you planted tomatoes last year, but I'm not gonna worry about that. Like I said, we're gonna do a do-over. And I challenged myself to not buy any seeds online. I know it's really, really hard to not do that because you want to grow all these new varieties, but we had a lot of seeds left over, so I said, you know what? As hard as it's gonna be, I'm just gonna plant what we have in our seed box. That said, I wanted to have a little bit more fun and plant some other varieties that we didn't plant last year, so I didn't update our tomatoes here, but we have a lot of paste tomatoes, we have opalkas, Amish, San Marzano. I have some green zebra tomatoes that I want to try growing this year, which is more of a slicer, I believe. And then we're gonna do a couple varieties of cherry tomatoes. We're gonna do black cherry, I think, sun golds, which are our favorite, and we're gonna try the Brad's Atomic again, which didn't do well last year, but willing to try again. I started a bunch of peppers, but it's really kind of like everything under the kitchen sink, whatever we had left. We're gonna do probably 6 basil plants. That works really well because when I prune them, which I do many times a season, that's enough to make 2 2-ounce jars of pesto, so we always have a lot of pesto in our freezer, which is great. We're gonna do lots of beets and carrots again. Those are really good for eating fresh. I planned on making our lettuce plot smaller, but I didn't do that. So we're gonna have the same amount of lettuce that we had last year. These over here are Brussels sprouts, and then as I said earlier, we really want sugar snap peas. We like those for fresh eating. We love cucumbers in, what's it called, like a Greek salad, super delicious. We ended up buying a lot of those from the grocery store last year. And then we eat a lot of green beans. We love green beans, and we always end up buying those. We've never tried growing them ourselves. So I thought, how are we gonna grow all this? And some of these things do really well with a trellis. So I thought, you know what works really great as a trellis? Your garden fence. So I thought, hey, let's try it out. So all of these things that can be trellised, I decided we're gonna plant kind of on the back row and see if we could get them to climb, because that frees up a lot of our bed space, right? So that's my dream, is that I'm gonna have a wall here of sugar snap peas, cucumbers, and beans, and it's gonna be beautiful, like my little secret garden. What do they say? You aim for the moon, and if you land among the stars, that's still good. So that's kind of what we're going for. And then, because I just wanted to have, I don't know, let my hair down a little bit and have some fun, I thought it'd be really fun to grow fruit. We never got a dang torpedo melon. They're like little 1-pound melons. I thought it'd just be fun. I haven't heard of them before. And once you start melon tasting, it's kind of addictive, so I'm not ready to give those up yet. I also have some sugar baby watermelons. I bought some pumpkin seeds that were really cheap, and then I bought some cantaloupe seeds. And we're gonna try to trellis those up on the fence too. It's a really big what if, like we're just gonna try it. And then I'm not sure what I'm gonna plant in those beds. We're just gonna kind of play it by ear. In a way, I feel like I need to just not be so rigid and just have a little bit more fun with it. That's what we did in our first garden in these beds, and I feel like it went better than being too rigid. So that's why I'm just over starting stuff. I don't know what's gonna fit. I don't know what's gonna grow and germinate. I don't know what's gonna transplant. I don't know what's gonna survive the transplant. So that's why this is just kind of like let my hair down space. We have all of our garlic down here. Those beds will be freed up. I started parsley, I started cilantro. I'm gonna try to grow herbs again and maybe be more successful this time. And then we just started a lot more flowers. So we started nasturtiums again. Those are edible, they're delicious. Actually, they're pretty. I don't really taste them, to be honest. Calendula, we're gonna try that again. Marigolds, and then morning glories. I love morning glories, but instead of direct sowing them, we're doing everything that we can as transplants, because I feel like that ensures they're gonna grow. It's really hard to keep an area moist once you plant the seed because it disappears, and it's hard to keep all your beds moist, especially if you're still on somewhat limited water like we are now. So morning glories, sweet peas, bachelor buttons, those are beautiful, alyssum, and snapdragons. So here's hoping we have a really good garden. Last year we did a video on our seed starting setup, and I would say it worked pretty well, but I feel that there was room for improvement. All of our starts were itty bitty when we put them into the ground. Our tomatoes were literally like 1 inch, 2 inches tall. They did catch up to tomatoes that were, 2 feet tall, but it was my goal this year to try to put out more mature plants, and there were 2 ways I could think to do that. One was to start earlier than what the seed packets say, which for peppers, it's 8 weeks before your last frost date, and tomatoes, 6 weeks before your last frost date. And talking to people around here, people start like way earlier than that, like February early. So that's what I did. These babies have been started for a very long time. The other thing that I decided to do was up pot, or size their pots up. Last year we had these guys, and that's just not very much space for a tomato plant. And when you get ones from the nursery, they're in 4-inch pots like this. So I thought maybe they're kind of stunted, their growth is stunted. Some people say that fish grow to the size of their tank, and maybe it's the same with tomatoes. Our basil were so tiny when we put them out that they just disappeared. So I think a pest got them. They're still not very large, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on these guys, try to keep them and not lose them. So that's our big change. We just started a lot earlier and we're sizing up on our pots. Check out all these. We got a couple zucchini plants, couple pumpkin, cucumber, got a pepper in there. Last year I started quite a bit more than we would need, and I'm happy I did because we lost a lot of our seedlings, maybe because they were so small or due to a pest, and I did that again. I overstarted what we could, and I'm even happier I did this year because for some reason we still had a fairly bad germination rate on some stuff, and then once I left all my seedlings outside overnight and killed some of them. And as I was saying earlier, just because you have a healthy seedling doesn't mean it's gonna survive transplanting necessarily, so just started too much stuff. If you remember last year, we had a much smaller seed starting shelf, and it was wide enough to put 1 tray on each level, and I think we had 5 levels, but because we were going to be up potting this year, I knew that we were gonna need more space. So we upgraded to a 4-foot wide rack, and then we could turn the seedling trays this way instead of, the way they were before, so we can fit a total of 8 between these 2 shelves. And again, if we need to in the future, we can free up more shelving. I've been absolutely relentless on starting and restarting seeds. Every time I lose something or, we don't get great germination, I just plant them again. But we are getting down to the wire here, so I don't know if I will be doing any more rounds. Like, look at that. I've kept this moist. Brand new packet of bell peppers. Out of 6, 1 of them went. What the heck, bell peppers? And I'm still trying to keep up with microgreens here and there. If you remember, we did a microgreens video. We have 1 seed. It's like kind of a mixture of different seeds, and it does really well, and I had a very poor germination rate with basil, so I did a little research. I tried something different, and the basil's still sucking royally. I'm gonna link to the video of our seed starting setup. We linked to a lot of great resources of things that we're using. We're on year 2 of our seed starting equipment, and we went with something really high quality. It's not flimsy. You could probably literally run over this with our truck and it would be fine. So we hope this is lifelong equipment, but because we're upsizing, now we're running out of our basic 10-20 trays, which really just hold all of this. It's so we can water our seedlings and the water doesn't drain and run onto the floor, so I've been using cookie sheets. But I haven't bought more because I feel like we're only gonna be running low about 1 month out of the year, so I'm willing to make do. And because these guys are just much older plants, I've been trying to keep up with fertilizing them a couple times a week with a fish and seaweed fertilizer. So they're not dying, so hopefully that means this stuff's doing a pretty good job. So there you have it. There's our grand garden plan 2020. We're obviously very young gardeners. This is only our 3rd attempt at like a legit garden, and I can say every year we're learning a ton, and I think I enjoy documenting this process because it's full of challenges, it's full of failures, but it's also full of success. But I think with gardening, our advice to people is always just get started wherever you are. If you're in an apartment, you might be able to start with one plant on your patio. But I do know it's spring, hope is in the air, and we're really, really hoping for our best garden yet. And remember, food and eating, it's a very serious thing. We need to eat. But gardening, above everything else, should be fun. All right, our average last frost date is just 3 weeks away. Ready, set, go.